Alright, so today we're looking at Congress in action. The opening day in the House of Representatives, the first thing that they're going to do is they are going to select a Speaker of the House, which is the presiding officer, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But by custom, the Speaker is a long-standing member of the majority party. And so what they do in the House is everybody gets up because everybody's got a new term and they are sworn in. So they swear in the Speaker, and then the Speaker turns around and swears in the rest of the House that they're going to uphold the Constitution and do the best that they can to make good laws, kind of thing. The same kind of thing happens in the Senate. The opening day of the Senate, about two-thirds of the Senate's membership is carried over. Only 1/3 are in for a new session, and so that new 1/3 are sworn in for their new term, and so then they're kind of welcomed in, kind of thing, or welcomed back if they're returning members. So, like I said, each house has their own presiding officer, and the House has the Speaker of the House, and they are the elected presiding officer of the House. They are the acknowledged leader of the majority party, so whatever party's in power has the majority of members. That is where the Speaker comes from. They come from the majority party. Now, they actually have a fairly powerful position because it is their job, it is their duty to preside over the House and to keep order. And one of their ways of keeping order is that they recognize members of the House. So when something comes up for debate, when I say recognize members of House, you only get to talk if the Speaker says that you get to talk. They call your name and say because you put your name in that you would like to have something to say about this bill. And so they recognize members of the House, and so that's kind of a big power. If you are in the majority power and you really want this bill to go through, maybe you're only going to listen to people that you know are going to support this particular bill or get this law passed. Another job that they have is that they also refer bills to committee. So they send it into the different committees. They put questions to a vote. And typically the Speaker doesn't really vote all that often. They try to stay out of the voting process. They are aware of who supports their ideas and that kind of thing. And the only time that they have to vote is to break a tie. So it kind of depends on what's going on. The presiding officer of the Senate is the President of the Senate. Now, the President of the Senate is not a member of the Senate. It is actually the Vice President of the United States. And they basically serve the same function as the Speaker. Their job is to put questions to vote and to recognize members. But unlike the Speaker could participate, but typically they choose not to participate in the debate. The President of the Senate is not allowed to debate, and they can only vote to break a tie. They can't ever vote unless it is a tie. So that's one of the major differences between the Speaker. The Speaker tends to choose not to vote, and they have to vote if there's a tie. The President of the Senate cannot take part in the debate. They cannot vote unless it's to break a tie. That's the only time. So a little bit of a difference there. Now, like I said, they send bills to committees, and there are different committees in Congress. You have standing committees, and standing committees are the ones that are always there. And so you have standing committees in the House, and you have standing committees in the Senate, and bills are sent to them. And what they do is they kind of figure out, okay, what are the good ones, what are the bad ones, toss out the bad ones, work on the good ones. Are there a bunch that are kind of similar? Can we combine them together, take the best ideas from each of them and make something new? So that's what their job is basically to sort and filter. The second type of committee are House Rules Committees, and the House Rules Committee, you have one in the House and one in the Senate, and what they do is they're kind of the traffic cop. They help to screen the bills that are coming through, so they really get rid of the crazy, wacky ones. The next kind of committee are the Select Committees, and Select Committees have a very specific purpose, and they're usually around for just a limited time. Some of them are around for longer than others. It just kind of depends on what the issue is. Do they need a long time to look at it, or is it something kind of a short-term sort of deal? But typically a select committee is there to investigate a current matter. So we had a select committee to investigate the federal government's reaction to Katrina. We had a select committee to look at the government's response to 9/11. Could we have prevented it? That kind of thing. There's been select committees on media violence and if that's impacting kids and should that be regulated, video games and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different topics that they're looking at, and some of them, like I said, are longer term than others, and so it just kind of depends on what their view is of how much time they need to look at things. The next kinds of committees are joint and conference committees, and they're kind of similar. A joint committee is where you have members of the standing committee from the House and members of the standing committee from the Senate meet together, and basically they're just trying to hash out ideas. Typically they're very temporary. They're not around for very long. Conference committees is where you have a temporary joint body, which means that all of the House and all of the Senate are meeting together, and what they're trying to do is they're ironing out the differences of the bill. That maybe the House passed a version of the bill and the Senate passed a slightly different version, and so they are having problems trying to get this to get passed because they don't want to give up their particular parts of it. And so the conference committee is there to work out a compromise that we'll give in this little bit if you give in this little bit, and then we have a new bill, and then we can both pass it, and then we can send it on to the president for approval. So that's kind of how that works. So how does a bill become a law? Well, about 10,000 bills are proposed to Congress every year. That's a ton, and only 10% of them become laws. So even at only 10% of them, you're still looking at 1,000 bills that are going to become laws, new laws, 1,000 new bills every year. That's a lot. That is a lot to sort through. And so creating and introducing these bills, most bills don't start in Congress. They usually start somewhere in the executive branch or with private citizens who have ideas and they send it to their congressional members. However, only members of Congress are able to introduce a bill. So even though they may not always generate the ideas, the only ones who can introduce it are your members of Congress. And so what they do to introduce the bill is that they're going to drop it into the hopper. And the hopper is this box that's on the edge of the clerk's desk, and you stick it in it, and the clerk is then going to collect it, and they're going to type it up and assign it a number and all kinds of stuff. And hopefully from civics you remember this process that, it goes to, they give it a number, they identify it, and so in the House it's HR something, HR1 or HR5 or whatever number it is, and in the Senate it's S1 or S5. And so then it goes through the process of going to the committee, and then it's voted on, and it gets passed by the other house, and then it goes eventually to the president. There are different types of bills and resolutions. A bill is a proposed law that's presented to the House or the Senate. And there's two types of bills, basically. You have public bills, and public bills are those that apply to the nation as a whole. So it applies to the entire public of America. And so public bills tend to be things like taxes or weapons restrictions or things like along that nature. The other type of bill are private bills, and private bills apply to either a certain person or certain places. A great example would be we have national parks, and in these national parks we have wildlife that sometimes encroach upon the neighboring farmers or ranchers. So if you think like Yellowstone Park, there are farms and ranches around there, and sometimes the bears or the wolves get into the livestock. And so because it's federal property, the Yellowstone Park is federal property, it is federal responsibility. And so by not maintaining control over our animals. The federal government's not maintaining control over those bears and wolves that are out attacking people's livestock. It is the federal government's responsibility to compensate for that loss. And so some private bills are those that would compensate farmers or ranchers for the loss of their livestock due to wildlife attacks, kind of things. So that's a great example of a private bill. The next kind of things are joint resolutions. And joint resolutions deal with unusual or temporary matters, things that come up like once every so often or once a year or something like that. And so like a joint resolution is it's kind of like a bill, but it's not really a bill. It doesn't actually become a law, but it's a decision by Congress that they're going to do something. And so a great example of this would be every 4 years there's an inauguration ceremony for the president. Well, that costs money, and so the federal government pays for that. And so a joint resolution would be the money that is put aside for the presidential inauguration ceremony to pay for the food and the entertainment and transportation and the Secret Service protection at that time and all kinds of stuff. So that's what their job is, or what that does. The next kind are concurrent resolutions, and concurrent resolutions deal with matters that both the House and the Senate must act jointly on. Concurrent means that they have to work together, but these concurrent resolutions do not have the force of law. It's not a law, it's just like they're taking a position on something. So a great example of a concurrent resolution would be that they're stating a position on foreign relations, that Congress believes we should no longer have relations with North Korea because of their nuclear weapons building program, or their threat to their potential threat to the American way of life, or something along that line. So they're just taking a position. They're not doing anything about it. They're not passing laws about it. They're just stating their position of how they feel about this particular issue. And the last one are resolutions, and resolutions concern one house of Congress separately. So resolutions deal with just the Senate or just the House of Representatives. And what these resolutions are they're basically just an adoption of a new rule for maybe how they're going to choose their majority leaders, or how their opening day ceremony takes place, or whatever. It's just an adoption of a new rule that only applies to the Senate, or it only applies to the House of Representatives. So that is how Congress works in action.